Welcome to On Top of PR with Jason Mudd, presented by Review Maxer.
Hello and welcome to On Top of PR. I'm your host, Jason Mudd with Axia Public Relations. In this episode, we're joined by Linda Rutherford with Southwest Airlines. Portions of my audio from this broadcast were recorded later to remedy poor audio quality issues. Linda, welcome to On Top of PR.
Jason, thank you so much for having me.
Linda Rutherford is the Chief Administration Officer for Dallas-based Southwest Airlines, the nation's largest airline in terms of domestic customer boardings. Linda is known for creating and leading powerful teams that equip, empower, and engage the business to serve its people and customers. Linda, we're so glad you're here. I want to welcome you to the show. Today, we're talking about lessons learned from navigating a national crisis. And Linda, the airline industry has a lot of experience managing crisis, and I'm thrilled that we're able to talk about crisis, especially lately in the post-pandemic environment. It's definitely an interesting time to have you on the show as a guest. Thank you for being here, and let's talk a little bit about yourself first, Linda. Tell our audience, how did you get into public relations?
Thanks, Jason. It's an interesting journey, unintentional. I like to say that I'm the accidental executive. My background is in magazine and newspaper journalism. And so I started my career coming out of college working for Newsweek magazine. And then I also had the opportunity to work for several suburban newspapers and the metro paper, the Dallas Times-Herald. And while working for them, I became a beat reporter for the transportation beat, which, back in the early 1990s was covering American Airlines, Southwest Airlines, Continental Airlines down in Houston, and as well as Delta Airlines, large presence at DFW Airport. And through that process, got to know all of the airline people, really enjoyed being able to cover transportation. And then when the Dallas Times-Herald, unfortunately, went out of business in late 1991, I transitioned to doing some freelance writing. And in the process of doing that, had somebody from Southwest reach out and want to know if I was interested in interviewing for an entry-level public relations role, talking to reporters and pitching stories. And so I jumped at the opportunity and began that journey in June of 1992. And from there, it's really been, an on-the-job adventure for the last, 31 plus years.
Linda, that's excellent. I mean, 3 decades is a big deal. And so congratulations to you. Obviously, pardon the pun, you've landed at a great company. You like them and they obviously like you because you've climbed through the ranks and you've been there for 30 years. So congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Tell me, what was one of your initial impressions or surprises moving your career from working as a journalist to working as a public relations practitioner?
What struck me first were the similarities. There's, as reporters, we're seeking stories and to tell people's stories and find balanced and responsible ways to do that. And so a lot of similarities from the world of journalism into the world of public relations. The differences, I think, today communications represents the pace of media. Before it might have seemed a little slower and more leisurely. And today I would also say that public relations represents a lot more responsibility, frankly, for brand reputation, for issues management. And so the scope of public relations has really expanded from what we would remember public relations being 20 plus years ago.
It's funny, Linda, because 20 years ago, I would think that most of us thought we were about as busy as we could be and couldn't possibly handle any more work. That goes for both journalists and communication professionals. And yet here we are. I think I noticed initially when journalists started having to do blogs, starting to have, in addition to their normal reporting, they're also saying, we need a blog. We need to blog about these stories you're working on. We need you to write social media posts. We need you to go on air and do radio and video interviews. We need videos of you for our website and our own social media. And I feel like when we started out as journalism, we probably dodged a bullet by not having to do all of those things. Would you agree with that?
Very possibly, yeah. I was responsible for a 5 PM deadline, 5 days a week, and the world has certainly changed. There's no such thing as deadlines anymore because as soon as you have the content, you publish the content, then you continue to kinda to iterate, and by the way, the content's not just anymore the written word. I mean, we used to write stories and then file them for an editor to look at, and, then I would have turned to, like you said, writing a blog post about it or posting a video or doing, a podcast. So certainly the role of journalists has changed significantly, much like our roles in communications have.
Yes, I agree. I've been practicing PR and journalism slash communications. I guess my career really started around 1992. So around the same time you were entering PR, it sounds like. And as we do this business, it becomes clearer and clearer to me year over year that the best PR practitioners have not relied solely on media relations and earned media coverage to get their stories out there. And now we're seeing, I think, in the modern era, where it's very clear with the challenges of newsrooms and other things that, as you said, PR is taking on more and more responsibility. I think smart public relations practitioners have been doing that for a long time, trying to find ways to communicate directly with their constituents or critical audiences through various platforms. And even from a low tech standpoint, maybe it was a mailed newsletter or community meetings, and activities and tactics like that. So it's nice to have all this tech that we have today that we didn't have 20, maybe 30 years ago.
And honestly, that's been a gift because, Southwest Airlines' approach to business has always been to work directly with the customer. So if you remember when they first came on the scene in the 70s, they wanted to work directly with the consumer and bypass travel agents. And so that direct to consumer conversation and relationship translates really well when we think about, public relations and communications and marketing, because we wanted to have that closeness and that relationship with the customer. So when you look at digital spaces today and the one-to-many communication and engaging publicly, with your customers, the social digital age is really set up to how Southwest Airlines started its business, 50 plus years ago.
Linda, that's a great observation. There's no doubt Southwest is well known to be the disruptor of the airline industry from day one. And I think it's pretty cool and probably really exciting that you work at a place that has developed a culture like that.
Yeah, it's been pretty special. I mean, as a reporter, I know that when I would come onto the Southwest Airlines campus in Dallas, Texas, it was hard to be, objective, because there was just a culture of kindness, friendliness, people who looked you in the eye as they were walking up and down the hallways, a lot of hugging, even some kissing. And so, it was just a special kind of place, and being able to, maintain objectivity as a reporter was very difficult. So when I came to work here, it was really a natural fit for who I am and how I approach life and my value system. And so it was a really easy transition from that perspective as I came to work for the airline.
That sounds great. Well, let's talk about crisis communication and maybe even issue management. I'm sure you've earned your stripes in that space over the years, working for such a large enterprise and a fast-moving organization that where logistics and outside variables are very important, or external forces are very critical to operations. And so, Linda, I'd love to just talk to you about some of the challenges. We're recording this on January 10th of 2024, and just recently, an airline had an issue with a plane that was added to their fleet. I'd love for you to talk more about that a bit, not necessarily the specifics of what happened there, logistically or operationally, but obviously you're very familiar with what happened. You've probably studied it. I'm curious. I think our audience is curious to know what thoughts were on your mind. Obviously, when you first heard about it, what were your initial reactions? What was your internal process that your organizations went through? We would love to hear kind of what exactly happened at Southwest Airline when you heard this news about what happened with another airline and a particular jet.
Well, obviously, for this winter season, we were very closely monitoring the stability and integrity of our operation because we did not want a repeat of what happened in December of 2022. So, as we were watching, we saw another airline have some difficulty with an an in-air incident. And because it involved a MAX aircraft, the first thing we did was start asking questions related to whether that part similarly existed on our fleet of MAX airplanes. The answer to that is no, but that was the first question: is how are we going to be impacted? The second one was, what questions might customers ask? Just because you see MAX aircraft now in the public domain, would customers start saying, "Hey, gee, I wonder what airplane I'm going to be flying on," and making sure that our employees were equipped to direct customers to how to find that information. In other words, if I'm booked on flight 123 tomorrow from Dallas to San Antonio, where can I go to see what aircraft I would be flying on? We also, went to our library, if you will, of FAQs to make sure that we had, the answers to possible questions that the media might be asking of whether we were going to be scooped into the inspection requirements when the government issued its grounding, whether it affected us at all. Thankfully for us, in this particular incident, the answer to those questions was no. We're continuing to monitor the process, because if there is some finding that has a nexus to our fleet of MAX aircraft, obviously for safety reasons, we need to be vigilant about that, and then prepared certainly to manage whatever kind of communication we would need to develop as a result.
Got it. Okay, thanks for sharing that, Linda. Tell our audience, what does your team there at Southwest Airlines look like?
So the communications team is, for us, it's broken into 4 key areas. One is in media relations and external communication. One is in internal communication, focused on our employee operational communication and our intranet for our employees. And then we have our social and digital content creators. And then lastly, we have a group that focuses on analytics to kind of help watch the performance of some of our messaging, take rates when, open rates, things like that, when we're monitoring our various audiences' consumption of our messages. So altogether, that's probably 60 or 70 people, which is a pretty sizable organization. But we also do most of the work, whether we're doing strategic counsel or actually execution. We do that all in-house. We don't tend to lean on outside agencies for that type of support.
And so, Linda, if there were a crisis tomorrow, and obviously no one wants that, what's the process there at Southwest Airlines? What do you do? Do you call a team meeting? How do you all handle those situations today?
So there's a lot of preparation that goes into any type of emergency response. So the first thing I would tell you is that Southwest has done a lot of work in advance to sort of map out potential contingencies for any type of crisis. That could be, financial crisis, personnel crisis, natural disaster crisis, operational crisis. So we've done some pre-work to understand checklists, protocols, approval lists. We all know our roles as emergency response team members. We know where to go. There is a section of our headquarters building here in Dallas called the Headquarters Emergency Command Center, where we all go. We have assigned seats, ironically, in that room. We know where we're supposed to go and sit. And we already know what our roles are and what our priorities need to be when we're responding to whatever type of crisis we're being called to respond to. From a communications perspective, we would have people mobilize in the HEC, we call it, the Headquarters Emergency Command Center, but then also in a couple of other designated areas. And we are immediately, gathering facts, getting them confirmed, developing initial statements, determining who our chief spokesperson is going to need to be based on the dynamics of the crisis, and gathering information as much as we can to determine whether we're going to have to do a live media briefing, what type of communication needs to go out to our employees, and then what other constituencies and stakeholders do we need to reach to, regulators, the FAA, the DOT, elected officials. You can imagine the list of stakeholders gets pretty long and complex.
Yes, I would imagine so, especially with all the potential scenarios a large enterprise organization like yours must have, with all the people and operations going on simultaneously worldwide. mostly in the US, but you're also flying international destinations now as a company. So you probably just got almost endless potential scenarios that you have to account for and consider and document and message. What would be a ballpark number of scenarios that you're actively and currently prepared for throughout the enterprise, Linda?
The last time that I went through a review with the communications team, we were at about 86. Now, of course, you can't plan for infinite number of events, but what we tried to do was prioritize the ones that had the highest likelihood of happening, and then also the highest likelihood of having brand damage or reputational damage. And so that's obviously where we focus our attention. And like I said, the last time I counted, it was about 86 that we focus on. And that's sizable. Every 2 or 3 years, we cycle through all of them to try and update them and make sure that our thinking is current. We would still agree on, the checklist. We still agree on who we think would be the chief spokespeople or person in that incident. We have, the makings of initial holding statements. Are those still, fresh and usable? And if not, how do we improve upon them from the last time we reviewed them?
So did you have a plan in place for a door or some sort of opening occurring in flight? Is that something you guys had already thought about and had a scenario planned out and communications ready for?
Yeah, and actually, we would call it an in-flight depressurization event, which is what happened here. And we've actually had this happen before. If you'll recall, actually, tragically, in April of 2018, we had a depressurization event as a result of an engine failure that caused a piece of the engine cowling to flip off of the engine and strike the aircraft. And when it did, it broke a window, which depressurized the cabin. And unfortunately, a passenger who was sitting in the aisle seat was partially ejected from the airplane and had to be brought back in, and she did not survive. So, we know what to do to respond. It doesn't change the human aspects of a crisis like that, of course, because tragically someone lost their life. We have had other depressurization events where there has been, for whatever reason, a failure of aircraft skin that has created a depressurization. We had one notably that was in the top section of the airplane. And we had to divert. That was the one that landed in Yuma, Arizona, several years ago. So we do have experience dealing with these kinds of crises. Obviously, first and foremost, it is the safety of our passengers and employees on the affected flight. It is what do we need to do to get them safely on the ground, and then what do we need to do to understand, obviously, what happened, so we can go about learning how we prevent it from happening in the future.
For obvious reasons, with passenger safety being so important, you're in a highly regulated industry. So you're going to have to deal with regulatory investigations and other compliance and regulatory bodies. Is that correct?
But yeah, we like to say that we're we're in a deregulated environment, but we're regulated in the air and on the ground. So yeah, it keeps things interesting. I also like to say that we operate. We fly the general public and we operate in weather. So what could possibly go wrong on a daily basis? But that's why you spend a lot of time preparing and understanding what your contingencies are, and unfortunately, knowing those things that might go wrong so that you can be prepared, and spend that time and energy doing so, and then hope that you don't need to ever open that particular plan.
What kind of scenario requires going to the heck, or who makes the decision to summon people there?
I would say our day-to-day expected disruptions would be managed from everybody's functional points of view, or our desk, as you say. For instance, a weather delay. If you had a passenger disruption issue, maybe someone misbehaving, as someone who was overserved in the airport and now trying to board. Those types of operational disruptions can be managed from everyone's functional areas. You deploy to the headquarters the headquarters emergency command center when there is something that is at scale. So, you have a massive weather event that is going to be disruptive to hundreds of flights, potentially thousands of flights. You have an operational issue which has now caused significant damage to an aircraft or has resulted in injury or tragically any fatality. You have an issue that is creating financial stress, acute crisis financial stress on the organization, or you have a personnel issue or a natural disaster. So, for instance, a hurricane, a tornado, or some sort of massive weather system that is creating severe disruption in a big geographic area. Those would be the reasons that you would deploy folks to our headquarters emergency command center and then begin to address this on a broader scale.
Just yesterday, there was a quote, winter storm, unquote, right across most of the East Coast. At least that's what I experienced where I live. Was that material to your organization with all the tornadoes and lightning storms that were going on simultaneously? I know from social media it impacted people at least as far north as Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and definitely as far south as Tampa, Florida, maybe even Naples.
Certainly. I mean, and we've obviously been paying close attention this winter. It kind of started with some of our late December weather systems that created dense fog at Chicago's Midway Airport, as an example. That was something that we needed to manage. It didn't rise to the level of Headquarters Emergency Command Center because we were able to utilize all of our resources in our Network Operations Control Center to manage that. But certainly, as weather systems have been moving through, we've been able to track those. There was some activity in the Northeast that we've been looking at. There's been an intense rain in Florida, and so all of those are cross-functional response efforts that we pay attention to. Some of that's seasonal, right? In the summertime, you have extreme heat. In the winter, we're obviously monitoring winter storms, high winds, and anything that could prevent a sizable number of aircraft from sort of moving through the system as we would expect them to.
Yeah, so that sounds to me like just another day in your world of having to manage multiple external forces, including weather and other things, to a significant operation that has so many variables involved. Does your organization use any particular type of software to help you with crisis communication internally or externally? We've had previous guests on the show that offer software for crisis management that is an app that your field employees can have on their phone and allows you to kind of keep an online document repository of processes and messaging and other plans and materials.
Not really. We use a lot of the very typical collaboration tools. So internally, we have a system where we're able to collect all of our crisis information in one place. Multiple teams can access and use that. Externally, we use the very typical distribution platforms that you would need to get news out. Internally, we utilize our intranet. We also have employees who can opt in to text messages. We've got a great take rate there to kind of reach people where they are, but nothing extraordinary or unusual in terms of the tools that we use.
Okay, so for example, you might be inclined to have something similar to, say, a SharePoint file server to store, or some kind of internal file management system.
Yeah, we do that. Ours is called Web EOC, but it is a place where we can where we have multiple access for headquarters emergency teams. It operates like a SharePoint site. When we have to convene people to share information, we utilize Microsoft Teams.
I know there's a handful of crisis management software and tools out there. Like I said earlier, people can have apps on their phone, and you're pushing out messages, and a crisis situation demands that all those files are available in the cloud. Obviously, that's very specialized. I wondered if you guys were doing anything like that at Southwest Airlines.
No, and there's a couple of different reasons for that. We have an emergency director who has to clear all information, and so there's a process that we use internally to do that. So we don't want to necessarily have information dispersed immediately, open access, for fear that people might begin using information before it's been cleared for distribution. The other specialty thing that we have as an airline is the National Transportation Safety Board. If we were to have an accident, as an example, becomes the responding investigative agency, but they also become the agency of record. And so we have to coordinate everything with them. And so, for instance, if we were to make detailed statements about what was happening after an accident, we have to get all that cleared through them first. And so we have not utilized cloud simply because we want to make sure that the information that we're collecting and processing makes it through all of those gates before we actually use it.
Okay, that sounds very complicated. There are what sounds like an incredible amount of moving parts, from people, planes, passengers, staff, crew, weather, and other factors. Linda, let's take a minute here and go to a quick break. We'll be right back on the other side with more On Top of PR with Linda Rutherford of Southwest Airlines.
You're listening to On Top of PR with your host, Jason Mudd. Jason is a trusted advisor to some of America's most admired and fastest growing brands. He is the managing partner at Axia Public Relations, a PR agency that guides news, social, and web strategies for national companies. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to On Top of PR. I'm your host, Jason Mudd. We've got Linda Rutherford here from Southwest Airlines. Linda, I'd love to just touch on something you mentioned earlier. In December of 2022, you had what I remember being a technology challenge that impacted your entire fleet, or at least that's what I recall seeing in the news. Obviously, that's a huge event, especially during the busy holiday season. Would you walk us through some of the lessons you learned from an experience like that?
Yeah, Jason, the first thing I would tell you is it was not a technology event. It was a weather event. So Winter Storm Elliott moved through. It created, high winds and a lot of snow and ice. The two major airports for Southwest that were impacted were Denver and Chicago Midway. We had a plan we had already, we'd worked on staffing, we'd worked on winter ops protocols. So we were prepared and had a plan to get, X number of airplanes, we call it throughput. So, taking off and landing even in the wake of those storms. We were not able to keep up with our planned throughput. And over time, the operation deteriorated because 25% of our flight crews originate in either Chicago or Denver. So when you have a storm like that prevents you from getting airplanes to take off out of those cities, we were not able to get fresh crews out of Chicago and Denver to begin to serve the rest of the operation. So as day one and day two and day three began to wear on, other airlines were recovering from the winter storm, and we were not, because we were not able to get new crews out into the system to operate our aircraft. When that happened, you then had last minute cancellations, never mind the pre-planned storm cancellations, but all of a sudden we've got a plane full of people with checked bags sitting on an airplane waiting on pilots and flight attendants to come in. And when they didn't, we had to cancel those flights last minute. So then that started to perpetuate across the system, and that began to overload crew planning tools, baggage handling systems. And so then you started to see the stress and the pressure on our existing technology. And my analogy is, when Taylor Swift tickets went on sale and Ticketmaster had a brownout, that's basically what happened. But it started as an operational issue, our failure to be able to get crews moving, which then created volume, which then overwhelmed some of our technology systems. So our answer to that was we took what is normally a 4,100 flight a day operation down to roughly 1,500 flights a day. And by reducing the schedule, we were able to move crews, we call it deadheading, but moving crews around and empty airplanes around to get everything matched back up, so that when we got to December 30th of 2022, we were able to, restart the airline and operate a full schedule. But it created about, 8 or 9 days of pain and inconvenience and disrupted travel for our customers. And then obviously, a lot of sleepless nights for our employees who were working overtime to try and, rematch customers with airplanes and get them their bags back.
So no doubt, Linda, you and your team earn a shout out for working sleepless nights and around the clock yourself. Just dealing with something like that should be really stressful. So thank you for clarifying that. Again, as a consumer in the marketplace, I had a perception that it was a technology issue. Did you ever figure out where that storyline came from, how that developed?
So certainly is one of the early storylines that took off. We did have a union, which we were negotiating with at the time, that was perpetuating the story by calling crew scheduling technology antiquated. So that storyline was out there. A lot of media were picking that up. We really had to balance the desire to respond to the issue in the moment, which was my flight's canceled. I'm a stranded customer. What are you doing to get me where I need to go? And so we put most of our energy in what we call the immediate response effort, which was just every media across the country was calling, wanting to know what's the status of operations in Amarillo or Boise, Idaho, or Newport, Virginia. And so our first priority was to make sure that everyone understood the current status of the operation. Then we needed to work on recovering. So once we, walking the media through what we were going to do to reduce the flight schedule, to rematch airplanes and fresh crews and restart the airline, basically. And then once we did that, it was going into the deep dive of what happened, what lessons have we learned, what do we need to do differently, what investments do we need to make, for instance, in de-icing trucks, in more personnel helping on the ramp, in improving our telephony systems for our flight crews, in improving some of our software systems to help with integrated solutions. So, for instance, prior to our incident in December of 2022, you solved for aircraft disruption. And then once you had that solve, you handed it over to the crew scheduling folks who then tried to match up crews to the airplanes. We now have an integrated solution from a technology perspective where when you are trying to fix a disruption, it fixes both the airplanes and the flight crews at the same time so that you don't have any lag time there, which is a huge improvement. And then what we had to do was start what I like to call is the rebuild. We needed to rebuild credibility. Certainly with the flying public, we disrupted 2 million people and their travel plans. We needed to rebuild credibility with our employees who, certainly went through a lot during that entire time to try and serve the customer. We had regulatory agencies to answer to. We spent many months working with the Department of Transportation so that they understood how we were reimbursing customers, what our disruption messaging looked like, what we were doing to make it right with some of the reimbursements that we did above and beyond, refunds and things like that, returning bags to people. How long did that take? What did that effort look like? And then obviously we know that culminated this last December. The DOT issued a fine to Southwest Airlines as part of the negotiation to kind of close out this particular incident. So, we got some credit for what we had already done to serve customers. All in, Southwest Airlines spent about $1.1 billion in refunds, in investment, in reimbursements, in personnel, in overtime pay to address this particular situation. So the DOT gave us some credit for that. And then we also agreed to pay a $35 million cash fine to help settle this matter.
Wow. Well, that sounds intense. At some point, as I mentioned earlier, right, that perception existed. So perhaps it was generated, as you said, by unions, making that a point in the conversation. So speaking of it, at some point, do you probably just decide that it's important or not important to set the record straight and tell the full story of what happened? Or do you just not think that's important because the passengers don't care what the reason is? They just want to get to where they're going, make sure their family arrives safe to their destination, and that they don't feel stranded. So internally, do you have a conversation, and what does that look like to decide, hey, is this important that we correct the message and get it out there? How do you balance correcting the message versus just moving forward and focusing on what your customers and what the audience you're talking to cares the most about?
That's a great question, Jason, because, there's a lot of demand to say everything at once, but we didn't necessarily have the credibility to say everything at once because you had people that were sitting there who wanted their bags, who were stranded in airports, who couldn't get to their destinations that they planned to spend the holidays with, friends and loved ones. And so, to say, hey, this wasn't a technology issue, that wasn't what anyone wanted to hear on day one, day two, day three of this crisis. What they wanted to hear was, when are you going to get me where I need to go? And then what are you going to do to learn what happened here so that it'll never happen again? And so I would say it was more about there's an order to things. The first thing we needed to do is be credible with the information that we were giving you on the status of the operation. The second thing we needed to do was be credible on how we were going to restore and restart the airline. And then the third thing we needed to be credible on is how we were going to go investigate what happened and articulate the lessons that we learned. And so, we did tell the whole story. We had our chief operating officer give congressional testimony before a Senate subcommittee and told the whole story like I'm telling you. We did media desk sides with key media to kind of walk them through the lessons that we were learning. We hired Oliver Wyman to come alongside us and do a third-party assessment to see if they were coming up with anything that we weren't in terms of understanding what happened and what we could do to prevent it. And then we launched a microsite at the end of March in 2023 that listed all of the things that we had learned about what happened and the steps that we were going to take. And we went a step further and made it a checklist. And all through the year, as something was accomplished, as a piece of technology was implemented, as more de-icing trucks were purchased, we were able to check mark that so that by the time we got to this winter, the traveling public could go there and see that, in real time, what we were doing to hold ourselves accountable to make sure that, this type of travel disruption could never happen again.
That's impressive, especially that you decided to do a microsite to fully disclose the action steps you were taking. And so, yeah, I'd say kudos to you and your organization for doing that. I tell people all the time that PR, reputation management, whatever you want to call it, at the end of the day, it's about building up the equity so that when, not if, you have an issue, people already know that you're trustworthy and honorable to do the right thing. I know Southwest has been working on that reputation for decades and has earned a good reputation for that. So I have to think an incident like that happened one time. And when you live up to those values, I think that goes a long way with your passengers and your employees and just the community overall. When they, like you, know you, and trust you, they're going to be a lot more forgiving in events like this where, accidents happen or things happen and mistakes happen and you just have to move on.
Yeah, Jason, that's a really good point. I mean, our CEO spent a lot of time saying that, we really messed up and we're sorry for it and we're going to figure out what happened and make it right. But 1 week does not define Southwest Airlines. And I really appreciated it. And I think our employees needed to hear that too, because we take a lot of pride in being able to connect people, to the important events in their lives. And when we fail to do that, that's a gut punch. And we certainly want to do whatever we can to make it right. And so there was a commitment to doing that. Our communications team was proud to tell the stories during the entire year of what we were doing to get us there. And I think that, we had a great winter season. So I know we're still in it, but at least for, Thanksgiving and Christmas of 2023, I mean, it's just been a remarkable performance by our people to connect our customers. And I think, for instance, between December 20th and December 26th, we operated over 30,400 scheduled flights and completed more than 98% of those. So, certainly a testament to all the work that happened during the year to make sure that we had a durable, reliable operation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Linda, what other thoughts would you share with our audience today about crisis preparation, crisis management, and other tips or recommendations such as lessons learned in crisis communication?
I've been asked this certainly a lot in the last year, and it comes down to preparation. You need to make sure that before you're in the crisis, that you've actually taken the time to think about, what could go wrong here, and what would be the implications of something going wrong, and what should my priorities be when I am going to respond. The second thing is understanding, the page principles, right? From a communication standpoint, tell the truth, as if the reputation, as if the company's reputation depends on it. Utilize all of your resources. Know what those are. So don't be afraid to create checklists and follow your checklists. You are likely going to have to start telling the story in the world we live in today before you have all of the information. And so understanding and helping the executives and other leadership understand that this is an iterative process. The first thing you need to do is respond to what's right in front of you, and then you can begin to build on the story, as you go and as you learn more. Admit mistakes, be honest, and then be very transparent about what you're doing to fix things. And I think I've seen that pattern in how we respond to various crises. Nothing was really different in terms of how we approached last year's crisis. Certainly the scale and the attention was massive. But our commitment to being thoughtful, being truthful, being timely, admitting mistakes, being transparent, was still very much present in our crisis response strategy, as it had been when we've dealt with other crises in at least my 30 plus years of being here.
Wonderful. Linda, this has been great. I would be remiss in wrapping up our episode if I didn't ask you about, and you've hit on this several times, but just the culture of Southwest Airlines, well known for being a great place to work. I mean, your stock ticker is LOVE, LUV. And you said it earlier, and I wrote it down, a culture of kindness. I love that. If we're talking to an audience of fellow communication professionals, public relations executives, maybe they have a desire to create a great culture at their organizations. What have you learned that you can share with them? I mean, obviously, you joined Southwest Airlines where the culture was already well established, already well known. But if somebody works in an organization today, maybe that is working to build a great culture at another organization, what would be some of your recommendations?
I think it has to start at the top. So the first thing you must have is an intentional CEO who intuitively understands the power of a strong organizational culture, because it creates, talent that feels free to, perform at their best. It creates high levels of engagement where people understand the company direction. It compels people to give discretionary effort in service of the customers. And so I would say that the most important element of thinking about how to improve your culture or build a healthier culture is the commitment of leadership to do so. Because it's tone from the top. They set the example. Employees and other leaders will behave as they see that leadership team behaving. And so there really has to be a first very honest conversation about what that would look like for an organization, what would need to be done differently, what type of investment would need to take place, because culture is not throwing a party or giving a gift. It really does come from the people who are willing to work as hard for one another as they are to serve the customer. And it comes from a place of safety where people feel like their job is secure. They feel like they can, they'll follow the manual, but they also know that they can color outside the lines if they need to get creative to solve a problem, and they won't be punished for it. They want it to be an environment where there's directional coaching, right? I'm going to know if I've done a good job. I'm going to know if I need critical feedback, because the leaders know what that looks like, and they're also going to deliver that day in and day out. And so I would say that those are some of the foundational elements that have to be involved when you're looking at continuing to nurture a great culture, or even build one from scratch, or even help get involved in maybe turning an unproductive or sick culture into a good one.
Yes, for sure. That's great advice, Linda. I want to take a moment to say thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your smarts with our audience. I know you're very busy and a well-accomplished professional, so we really appreciate you sharing today. And I look forward to interacting with you in the future. So thank you again for sharing today.
Well, thanks for your interest. It was great to be with you.
Yes, thank you, Linda. It was great to be here with you too. So with that, that's another episode of On Top of PR. We want to thank Linda and Southwest Airlines for joining us today and sharing their experiences. I'm sure you have benefited from this conversation, and we would love it if you would share it with a friend or colleague on social media or through a direct message or email. And if you would, in the comments, please let us know what you learned from this episode, what you enjoyed hearing, and maybe what action steps you're going to apply within your own organization when it comes to crisis communication and issue management. With that, this is Jason Mudd with Axia Public Relations signing off, and with our goal of helping you stay on top of PR. Be well.
This has been On Top of PR with Jason Mudd, presented by ReviewMaxer. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and check out past shows at ontopofpr.com.